to ask questions as well. So I will share my screen because I have a PowerPoint, which I can share with everyone after this presentation.
She just ended at 11.
So again, this is, today we're going to be talking about the statewide social justice youth tobacco control movement. And when I talk about this movement, I feel like it's really important to first underscore the topic with some basic definition of concepts and kind of the justification for why we are doing the work in this way. So today's objectives are as following: to describe social justice youth development, which is the guiding framework that we use for this movement; to discuss some of the root causes of youth tobacco use based on Healthy Kids Colorado data; and then to explain our project, which is the statewide social justice youth tobacco control movement. This is our wonderful staff. My name is Heather Kennedy. I'm the program manager. With us also, we have Daniel Martinez. He's the youth program senior specialist. You can also see Deja Cooley, who's on our team. She's our youth advisor. Amy Ryan is the assistant project director, and then Cerise Hunt is the director of the Center for Public Health Practice, and she is what's called the principal investigator. So these are all our members of our wonderful team. So to start, it's important to understand what we're talking about when we are discussing social justice. So social justice is both a process and a goal, and it results in full and equal participation of all groups in a society that are mutually shaped to meet everyone's needs, that resources are distributed in a way that is equitable to all members, and members are physically and psychologically safe, and that social actors, meaning every person, has a sense of their own agency as well as a sense of social responsibility towards caring for others. So in this movement is founded on principles of both positive youth development and social justice youth development. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Social justice youth development being the kind of major framework and complemented by positive youth development. So social justice youth development considers the ways in which young people can learn about power and the way it operates in their lives, and then how to contest or challenge or respond to the use of power. In a social justice youth development approach, there are three kind of processes that build on one another. An individual would first participate in activities related to self-awareness, and this is how each individual's identities, so meaning your race, your gender, your socioeconomic status or class, the education that you've received, your gender identity, if I haven't said that one as well, your religious affiliation, all those things, how they're related to your experience in the world. Then individuals participate in something called social awareness, or learning about how power functions in the social world. And then finally, global awareness, which I don't really love the way it's titled because it's not very self-explanatory, but essentially means young people and adults working in this model will understand and have the ability to create social change that challenges power hierarchies that have been used against them. In a social justice youth development model, there are 5 core elements, all of which have been integrated into the youth movement in various ways. So we will analyze power and the way that they operate in social relationships, where young people learn to think critically, ask questions. Young people demand transformation of power. So in this movement, we really center the ways in which youth and adults can create equitable distribution of power in relationship with one another. We're centering identity so that young people get a sense of pride regarding their cultural identities. And they understand how socio-political forces and structures shape your experience in the world. We promote systemic social change. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but really the goal of this work is not to just talk about the way that systems are created, but actually to impact change on those systems and to advance a more equitable society. Young people engage with adults in their community in collective action. And finally, this movement really promotes youth culture and is centered in really the values that this generation of young people really espouse. So doing this work, we are, in doing really high quality social justice youth development work, we're also doing positive youth development, which I know many of the folks in the under Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment are familiar with Colorado's approach to positive youth development. So in Colorado's approach to positive youth development, there are 5 core principles, and all of those principles align with the core elements of social justice youth development. So here in the graphic, you can see the ways in which social justice youth development advances high quality positive youth development. Happy to talk about this more at length if folks are interested. So social justice is applied to our youth movement in 3 main ways. First, young people will examine their individual experiences with and institutional causes of power, privilege, and oppression. Young people will learn the ways in which tobacco and nicotine are social justice issues. And then finally, young people will investigate the root causes of tobacco use and contest the unjust policies that have contributed to inequitable burdens. So first, the ways that we're going to be supporting young people to examine power, privilege, and oppression. Our movement, which is designed initially, each group that we recruit will complete a 6-session workbook. The workbook is designed so that youth and adults are learning together about their various identities, and meaning their age, gender, class, racial background, geographic location, and the ways that that might impact the way they see the world. So these are the different social identities and the concept of intersectionality, which is that each one of us is made out of a constellation of different identities. All of these things make up who we are. And it also impacts the way that we see and interact with the world. So the recognition that all of these things operate and create experiences of advantage or experiences of disadvantage. So being able to talk about this in youth-friendly and experiential ways is part of the youth movement. We also talk about how different structures or systems are set up to perpetuate inequality. And young people participate in an activity that they experientially experience, or that was redundant, they experience what power feels like when it's set up through a system, and how it feels to experience disadvantage, not because you haven't tried hard enough, but because the system is set up to be somewhat unfair. We also introduce young people to the concept of social determinants of health, not using that exact language, but something that we are all probably familiar with within public health, is the concept of the public health river analogy. So the town of upstream and the town of downstream. And so in this youth movement, we introduce young people to the concept of social determinants of health through a parable using the public health river story. And again, I'm happy to go into more detail about any of these things at the conclusion of this presentation, if folks want to know a little bit more about it. So we know, obviously, that almost 40% of our health is determined by these social determinants. So talking about that and the ways that that might impact the work that we do. So we start here with a more express understanding of how power operates, because once young people understand that power operates in the world, they can better understand the ways in which tobacco and the tobacco industry has used power over our people, our government, and even developing nations. And so we first understand how power operates in order to see the tobacco industry as an example of the misuse of power. So being able to talk about it from even a deeper level. And some of the previous scholarship on a social justice approach to youth engagement in tobacco control, there's one study that took a social justice approach, and in their study, they recommended that organizations who consider this approach first start with each individual's experience with their own identity before going into talking about tobacco and the tobacco industry and how bad the tobacco industry is. And so we really took those empirical recommendations to heart as we designed this youth movement. So now we're going to talk about how in our youth movement we center how the tobacco industry has misused power over people and our government. So we talk about the tobacco exploitation of people of color and in low-income neighborhoods, and we use a lot of the information from the Truth Campaign and expose young people to the fact that the tobacco industry is using power over African American neighborhoods and in school, like in retail settings in lower income neighborhoods as well. So just see if there's any other. We also talk about in this movement how the tobacco industry works to use power over developing nations. So the experience of young people in Malawi who are forced into a system of debt bondage or forced labor, and young folks who are using tobacco today might not realize that the tobacco that they are using comes from children who are working in fields in developing worlds. So we also talk about the tobacco industry and in particular electronic cigarettes and how those lithium-ion batteries, which are really the core component of many of the electronic devices, how they're not being disposed of properly and how they're negatively impacting our environment. So really trying to just talk about all the ways that the tobacco industry is causing harm to people and our world. In our movement, we also expose the fact that the tobacco industry are known racketeers and how they've influenced our government in ways that have prevented or restricted public health's impact on tobacco use. So talking about the tobacco industry and their contributions or their campaign contributions to certain presidential candidates and the way that that may have impacted FDA oversight or a delay in FDA oversight. So not necessarily making causal statements about these things, but having young people think critically about the way that the tobacco industry has influenced the way our policies work and our role as individuals and as groups in challenging that problematic use of power. Once young people have a strong understanding of the way that power operates in their own life and the way that the tobacco industry has used power over individuals, communities, and our government, we then start to talk about, well, so while tobacco use is certainly a problem, for many young people, tobacco use is a symptom of a problem that exists that's upstream. And so we start to talk about tobacco and the root causes of tobacco use among young people so that they can think about moving upstream and working on upstream solutions to those root causes. So each group will learn a little bit about, I'm going to actually go forward a slide before I go back. They will learn about the factors that are associated with youth tobacco use. And this slide is based on combustible tobacco. So young people who feel unsafe or disconnected from school are more likely to smoke. Young people who live in lower income neighborhoods, young people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer and experience discrimination. Young people who are multiracial and experience discrimination. Young people experiencing mental health challenges. And young people from the electronic smoking data, what we can see is young people who do not have an adult to connect with in their life are at much higher likelihood of smoking than their peers who do not identify as having one of these, I guess, risk factors. So talking about this as that these are some of the, these issues are some of the causes of youth tobacco use, and how can we move upstream? So then we go to talk about, after having already been exposed to the public health river analogy parable, they can then begin to understand that many of the things that we see in terms of youth risk behavior is really a result of other root causes. So young people in the movement pick one of the predictors associated with tobacco use, with youth tobacco use, and then do what we're calling a root cause analysis. The process that we use in this movement is called the 5 whys. And if we were doing this in a live session in person, I would have you all experience what the 5 whys process is like. But essentially what you do is you start with a why phrase, such as, why are young people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender and experience discrimination 2 to 5 times more likely to smoke? Then you go through a process of really not just thinking about the first thought is the best thought, but really digging deep into figuring out what is the real reason this disparity exists. And recognizing that disparities in tobacco use are also linked to other issues such as mental health problems and school disengagement. And so the goal of this movement is to interrupt the cycle. This is another explanation of the different cycles that exist for young people and the ways that addressing root causes of social problems disrupts the cycle. Young people who are disengaged from school are also more likely to be lower income, who are also more likely to smoke, who are also more likely to experience mental health problems and not have access to treatment. So seeing how the ways in which these are all connected is important, not only because young people know how complex these issues are, but to talk about them in any other way discounts the real experience of young folks. So in the movement, young people will select one of the predictors that they feel like is most pertinent to their community, do a root cause analysis, and then do what we are calling a participatory investigation. I'm going to move to the next slide that describes this a little bit more. These are the coalition activities in year 1. Then after they've done their root cause analysis, they do that investigation of a root cause in their local context, which I think could very much complement some of the data that you all are collecting through your community health profile. So the movement in this first year is really focused on understanding local issues, similar to the community health profile. And then in years 2 and 3, selecting solutions to address the problems of the root causes of tobacco use, and then advocate for policy change in year 3. So this movement by the numbers, just because it felt helpful for y'all to know about this, we'll be selecting, or have almost selected, we've selected 19 out of the 20 youth-serving organizations and schools who will each host a youth coalition. These may be existing groups that wanted to participate in the movement, or it may be new groups. Each coalition will have between, at this point, 6 and 80 young people. Each group is facilitated by an adult advisor. We also have a youth action board which will help guide the movement. Those are at least 8 young people who will brand the movement and guide many of the activities. We are in the process of finalizing our list of adult advisors who will support the Youth Action Board as they guide the movement and ensure continuity between the movement and local tobacco control activities. And then in every given year of the 3-year movement, young people will be planning and executing what we're calling the statewide activity that will elevate one single message, thinking about this kind of social justice tobacco control lens, and each coalition will be mailed a box of materials in which they'll facilitate the exact same activity as all the other 20 groups at approximately the same time. We anticipate that this activity will be either in March or April. and it will be planned in coordination with the Adult Advisory Board and the Youth Action Board. We expect that in year one that the issue will likely be around electronic cigarettes, given that that's currently the kind of most pervasive problem in Colorado. So that's likely what the first activity will be. And that's how we'll be creating this in more movement style. In year 2 and 3, we'll also be having youth leadership convenings in which young people from each of the 20 youth coalitions will come together to share what they did the previous year and get some training around the issues that they selected to work on so that they're able to advance their work. It's also always a best practice to get young people together to talk. So also should mention that this program design and this approach aligns with the Centers for Disease Control, STEP strategic plan, and kind of broader efforts for health equity. And you can see those outlined here. We are evaluating this as a somewhat innovative approach to working with young people. Although youth engagement in tobacco control is kind of very common and a widely accepted best practice, this particular approach in which young people are rooting this work in justice concepts is new, and therefore we hope to learn a lot about how to make this the most effective and appropriate project as possible as it integrates with your local work. This is a timeline of the movement. So we're recruiting host organizations. We do still have one spot available for host organizations to participate as a youth coalition. We have 19 organizations selected already. If you are interested and want to see if your community could participate, please stay on after the call or please reach out to me. We'll be conducting site visits with our groups, which every group gets trained on the 6 session workbook that really is the foundation for this movement. And then coalitions will complete the workbook, conduct their root cause analysis, participate in the statewide event, and investigate the root cause of their tobacco issue in their community by the end of this year. So lots of exciting things happening with the movement in year 1. We'll also have a brand new name for the movement. So Daniel and Deja are working with our Youth Action Board to brand the movement. So we'll have releases about that activity as it comes out in November. This is currently the list of youth coalitions and how they're distributed across the state. We've really tried to make efforts to ensure that we are a statewide organization. So it looks like we're definitely, in need of a group in the La Junta and or Eastern region. I've talked to many local public health agencies in that space, but would also be always open to having additional conversations. We've really tried to ensure that young people who would otherwise be considered on the margins, so young people of color, young people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer, young people who are lower income, are really the major focus of this movement. Not that we would exclude other young folks to participate, but that young folks who society has placed on the margin seek to benefit the most from being engaged, and are also the ones who are likely to bear the most burden from tobacco and nicotine use. And so those are the organizations that we've tried to target in our work. We will work with each local public health agency who has a coalition in their county and or region to ensure that the work feels aligned. And we believe that young people who participate in this movement will be uniquely prepared to support local tobacco control activities. And that doesn't preclude young people from participating in any existing policy work that's happening. And we would highly encourage young folks to consider the ways that they can elevate their voice and use their collective power to create community change. This is the contact, but I'll go ahead and stop the share of my 25-minute rundown of this youth movement and allow folks the chance to ask questions.
Heather, I might have missed it. How many youth are on the youth council and how many do you have already?
The Youth Action Board is made up of 8 to 12 young people, and we currently have 8 young people selected. And we have that one young person, Lynn Domenico. Daniel can speak more, but he's, I believe, from your region.
So
I had 2. I didn't know if you needed both of them or.
So we actually have 9. A new person applied, and so yeah, we're at 9 right now. And you know them both, Lynn.
Oh, you did get my both of them. Oh, good. Yay.
Thank you for your support, Lynn. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that this worked out.
Other comments or questions, concerns?
This is Kate from SE2. First of all, this sounds fantastic. It's very exciting. I'm wondering if you can help, and I'm sorry if you already went through this and I missed it, but help me understand where the Youth Action Board and the Adult Advisory Board intersect with the coalitions and how often and what that process looks like.
Of course. So the Youth Action Board in future years will probably be more directly linked to youth coalitions. This first year, given that we didn't have coalitions and we're actually recruiting the Youth Action Board and the youth coalitions concurrently, sometimes young people will be participating in local youth coalitions, and sometimes there may be other instances in which young people are not involved in their local youth coalition and still involved in the Youth Action Board. The Youth Action Board will meet by themselves for the first about 4 or 5 months so that they can increase their capacity to do social justice, tobacco control work. And then starting in February or March, the Youth Action Board and the Adult Advisory Board will meet together. So again, it's always best practice to ensure that before you bring young people in that adults are prepared adequately and the young people feel prepared adequately to contribute. And so that's kind of the model that we're using for the Adult and Youth Action Board components. And the Youth Action Board in year 1 is charged with planning and executing the statewide event and branding the youth movement. So the statewide event is the way that the youth coalitions will most interact with the Youth Action Board in year 1. We also hope the Youth Action Board will be able to complement and or support education around any state policy issues, recognizing that obviously we won't be involved in any kind of lobbying or advocacy necessarily, but the Youth Action Board would be well primed to support educating policymakers about their experience related to tobacco. So I kind of spoke a little bit about each group and how they might intersect, but more in year 2 and 3.
Okay, no, that's really, really helpful. And you know, we are also very focused on vape at the state level, and what we're doing with statewide media and things of that sort. So, you know, I can see and hope for a lot of synergies between what we're doing kind of, for air support and then what you guys are doing for ground support. So just want to make sure that we intersect when possible, especially before this statewide activity in March, so that we can all kind of be, beating the same drum and so that we have one kind of unified message and in so much as it makes sense to exemplify that through media, I would love to talk about that when the time is right.
And Allison is on our Adult Advisory Board for that very same reason that you just spoke of.
Yes, I'm very, very happy. She'll be a great addition. So yeah, this is very exciting. And just remind, what age range are you looking for? Is it 12 to 17?
In terms of the Youth Action Board or in terms of the youth coalitions?
The coalitions.
So the definition of youth based on the United Nations is 12 to 24. Our primary focus isn't on 18 to 24-year-olds, but we wouldn't want to exclude them from participating. So the primary focus is on, I would say, 12 to 18 or 19-year-olds, and yet we would allow young folks to participate aging ages 12 to 24, given that's the definition of youth.
Okay. Thank you.
Heather, this is Mike. I was looking at the map and I see locations in Walsenburg and Trinidad. Does that mean that coalitions have already been set up there? And who would I contact to visit with about that?
So Daniel, who is on this call, is the TA provider for the youth movement through that group. Debbie Berry is the one who connected us with the Youth Center of Trinidad and the Sangre de Cristo Youth Center.
Okay.
Groups. And so I'll have Daniel follow up with you. And perhaps if you would be willing to chat in to Daniel your email address, we can circle you in on those site visits.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Other questions or curiosities?
Are you also paying these kids like a salary as well, or some kind of supplement as well, or is it more on a volunteer basis?
The young people in the Youth Action Board are each paid. Now, there is a little bit of a sticky kind of way that we have to articulate this. So young people are being provided a stipend that approximates to $10 an hour for their time. Given that there's some constraints related to paying young people under the age of 15, we're being really thoughtful about the way that we articulate that. But young people are being compensated for their time. And then young people on the Youth Action Board who will be traveling to Denver twice in the first year their transportation is fully covered by the youth movement. And we also pay for overnight accommodations for them and their caregiver or parent guardian so that they can participate in youth leadership retreats. One which is coming up on November the 3rd. Where we'll be branding the movement. Young people in the coalitions, each coalition gets $5,000 for participating in the movement each year, as long as we continue to have funding. And so that money, we're recommending that coalitions consider compensating young people for their time. That's up to each individual coalition and their organizational policy related to youth incentives. However, that is part of the recommendation. I see on the chat box, somebody wanted to know if we had groups in Boulder, Jeffco, Broomfield, Adams County. We have one group who said they were interested in Adams County, I believe, but hasn't yet submitted their application. And then we have two groups in Jefferson County. We're trying not to have any more than two in any one county, although given the size of Denver and our interest in recruiting young people who are those that are sometimes not included in youth movements, we have increased the number in Denver County in particular, given the interest from organizations who serve young people who are refugees, young people who are LGBT, and young people who are African American. I'll also briefly speak about, just to fill air, and also happy to stop and let folks go with their day. But we have a pretty comprehensive process and outcome evaluation that we're doing with this movement to really understand if again, the approach is working. And so we have youth surveys, and we'll also be interviewing adults who participate in the movement. And then as young people advance social change, we'll be doing a lot of other kind of interview type stuff as we move into years 2 and 3. We're also documenting the kinds of contact we have with each group, not only because that's a good practice to ensure that we're providing high-level technical assistance, but also to see the ways in which accessing technical assistance impacts outcomes for groups. So happy to talk about that if folks want to talk more. And then Daniel, I can't remember the group's name in El Paso, but do you remember that second group in El Paso? Daisha has a question related to what the second group is.
Yes. So the other group in El Paso County is Second Chance Through Faith. And so we have that one in Inside Out. So we have those two groups there.
Any other questions folks have or want to know more about the youth movement? Obviously, you can always reach out. I'm available. Daniel's available as well. Daisha's available. We're happy to talk to you about this work. And again, we have that one more available grant to the first come, first serve person who submits an application. The applications were linked in a Keeping in Step newsletter, but you can also reach out to me to get the application. I'll share my screen one more time to just include the contact information so that you have access to it. It's here. You can reach out to us. And I will be sharing the slides after this presentation. We will include them, I guess, on the grantee site because that's the best way to provide it equitably. If you want them soon and don't necessarily want to go through the site, then I can PDF them and send them to you separately if you send me an email. My email is at the top. Daniel Martinez, his email is in the middle, and Deja's email is at the very bottom of this slide. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. This was great.
Really
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Have a wonderful day.